Welcome to the Darien League of Women Voters Candidates Night. I'm Clara Sartori, president of the Darien League of Women Voters. We are dedicated to promoting political responsibility through informed and active participation in government. Tonight's program will provide an opportunity for the voters to hear firsthand for candidates from the Board of Education. The evening's program will be live streamed on Channel 79 and rebroadcast throughout the weeks ahead. If you're watching live, send questions to lwvdariendebate@gmail.com. We're thrilled to have candidates appear with us live, socially distanced, and with masks. Please wear your mask unless you are speaking. I would like to introduce this evening's moderator, Marianne Pollock, who is here with us. Marianne is a league-trained moderator who has served on the local, state, and national League of Women Voters boards. She lives in Stamford and currently serves on the board of several nonprofits in Fairfield County. She has moderated debates in Darien and the surrounding towns for the past several years. We want to thank TV 79, all of the volunteers who made this possible, and I think that the next thing on the agenda here is to do the Pledge of Allegiance. So if you'll stand and face the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Marianne Pollock will now introduce the candidates and give some pointers about the protocol for the debate.
Good evening, and welcome to the Board of Education of Darien, League of Women Voters of Darien debate. The format we're using for tonight's debate is designed to allow the candidates time to discuss the issues. The only rule is that the total time used by each candidate by the conclusion of the debate be approximately the same. I will be posing the questions which have come from the League and the community. The candidates will not be restricted to 1 or 2 minute responses. Instead, they may spend as little or as much time as they feel is appropriate to discuss each issue. The goal is to encourage debate. Members of the League of Women Voters are serving as timers this evening for the candidates and will keep each candidate and me informed of the time expended. If a serious imbalance in time used should occur, it will be called to their attention. And your timers here have their placards with the candidates' names on them. The candidates will take turns being the first to respond to a question, the order having been determined by a draw. This order will also apply to opening and closing statements, each of which will be 1 minute. It is now my privilege to introduce the candidates for the Darien Board of Education. There are 4 candidates for 3 positions on the board. To my immediate left is Mr. Michael Burke. Next, Ms. Sarah Parent. Mr. Michael Deneen, Mr. David Deneen, forgive me, Mr. David Deneen, and Mr. Dennis Maroney. We will begin with the opening statements of 1 minute. The first to speak will be Mr. Burke.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Thank you to the League. In talking with so many parents over Zoom in backyards and, of course, at the dump during this campaign, I get asked, why another term and why should I get one? I run because the board is incredibly fulfilling. We all cherish our children and their futures. We all know that superior education is the key to opening the doors of opportunity, exploration, and engagement. Ensuring all of our learners obtain this vital key is an amazing feeling. I ask for your vote because I have a demonstrated record of helping our district be among the best in the country. Also, whether negotiating teacher contracts, scrutinizing budgets and policies, hiring principals and administrators, evaluating curriculum, or advancing facilities work, my guidepost has always been putting kids first. To be sure, we have challenges ahead in budgeting, facilities, and curriculum, just to name 3. I have the experience and ability to work with my colleagues, parents, and other town bodies to meet and surpass those challenges while always putting children first.
Ms. Sarah Parent.
Good evening. First, thank you to the League and to the Darien residents watching tonight. While I am the newcomer on this stage, I certainly am not a newcomer to education or the issues facing Darien schools. Through my various leadership roles in town, I have sat in the Board of Education room for the past 5 years. It is time for me to sit on the other side of the table. A little about me. My husband Greg and I moved here in 2009, and we have 2 terrific girls enrolled in the Darien Public Schools. Education is my passion. I have a master's degree in curriculum and teaching from Teachers College at Columbia University, and I have taught elementary school in both Connecticut and New York. There currently is no educator on Darien's Board of Education. Let me say that again. There is no educator in the group of people responsible for the oversight of the curriculum and the teaching of 4,600 children. In a time when there are shifts in the delivery of education and the priorities of our schools, that is a huge hole. I have the skills and the knowledge to fill that hole.
Thank you. Mr. Dennis Deneen.
Good evening. I'm David Deneen. I'm currently the Vice Chair of the Board of Ed and Co-Chair of the Oxbridge Building Committee, and I'm looking for the opportunity to serve a 3rd term on the Darien Board of Education. I want to start out by thanking the Darien League of Women Voters for hosting this debate. Thank you to my running mate, Dennis Maroney, and thank you, Mike Burke and Sarah Parent, for being here tonight. Our Board of Education philosophy is schools exist for children. I believe if we look at any opportunity or challenge with that guiding point, we will continue to be a highly performing district and prepare all students for the future. I've had the opportunity over the last 6 years to sit on several subcommittees on the board. The Budget Committee has worked hard to deliver fiscally responsible budgets that focus on the right investments for our students, teachers, administration, and facilities. The expanded team of psychologists this year has proved a solid investment this past year in helping our students during this pandemic. On the facilities front, we've received approval this past week to start the bidding process to build a new Oxbridge Elementary School. The shovel will go in the ground shortly. There is always more work to do on budgets, facilities, and our overall education. My goal for the board is to execute each day for the student and deliver each day and build for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dennis Maroney.
Hi. I would like to thank the League of Women Voters for organizing this event and thank my fellow candidates for coming out to discuss education in Darien and welcome the viewers watching tonight. My name is Dennis Maroney. I have lived in Darien for 24 years. My wife Holly was born and raised in Darien. My 2 daughters were born and raised in Darien as well. Becca graduated from Gettysburg College this spring and was a Darien class of 2016. And Cassie was a Darien graduate of 2019. She's currently a sophomore at Bowdoin College. I've been a member of the RTM beginning in 1998. I was on the Education Committee for 12 years, the last 5 as chairman. I've spent 3 years on the Board of Education, which I thoroughly enjoy and believe I bring a unique skill set to the board. I'm a perfumer by profession. I create fragrances for personal care products. This creative component of my job transfers well to the Board of Education as I am trying to improve and change the way the board operates and conducts business. I currently serve as the facilities chair on the Board of Ed. I sit on the negotiations committee as well as appointed to serve on the vision of the graduate element of our strategic plan and look forward to a healthy debate tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we begin the period of the debate with questions, just a reminder, cell phones should be turned off, please. All cell phones. Thank you. First question. We'll begin with Mr. Burke. It's important that any board have a diversity of talents and interests represented. What unique or special talent or experience would you or do you bring to the Board of Education? Secondly, what subcommittees would best suit you and your talents? So 2 parts, please. What unique or special talent or experience do you feel you would bring to the board? And what subcommittees would best suit your talents? Mr. Burke, please.
Thank you for the question. I am a litigation attorney. I am an advocate. As part of my professional work, I figure ways to get to the truth and get to the place where you need to be. I use those skills currently on the board as the chair of the policy committee and also a member of the finance committee. On those committees, we make factual investigations into board policies and procedures and spending. You have to be able to do your homework. You have to be able to do the reading. You have to be ready with important questions, not questions for just questions' sake. So I've enjoyed my work on those committees. I look forward to doing that again. I think my professional skills are well suited, and I add value to the board.
Thank you. So I think my education about education and my education of being an educator and being a classroom teacher will be incredibly important work as we move forward on the board. I think that until you actually walk the shoes of a teacher, and if you actually know how a school is run and what happens day by day, it's one thing to hear about it, it's one thing to learn about it, but to actually do it and be it is a perspective that is needed on Darien's Board of Education. In terms of subcommittees, I feel like the Facilities Committee would be a great fit for me. Again, being a teacher, I know well what a great learning space looks like and feels like. And there are definitely some work to be done in that area in Darien. And I think the Policy Committee is also a great committee for me. Policy is a blunt instrument, and it is important that we make sure that the policies that we approve are ones that will make sure that the best practices of education are put forth in Darien.
David Deneen.
Thank you. I am a banker during the day and Board of Ed member during the night and Oxridge building chair on the weekends. So those are the three roles currently. Over 30 years in banking, I think one of the passions that brought me to looking at participating in the Board of Ed was many years ago we started financial literacy classes in the bank. And the bank I was at the time was one of the first banks to introduce a financial literacy program and open a student-run branch in a high school in the Bronx. So my passion has always been around helping children, educating them, and especially around financial literacy. I've served on the Facilities Committee, helped spearhead the building of the Oxridge Elementary School, which will start shortly. I've sat on the Budget Committee. My background in finance and running retail and private banking and building and developing budgets has served me well on the Board of Ed. And I currently sit on the Policy Committee, and I think the Policy Committee is incredibly important in terms of helping and guiding us develop our goals and objectives as we move education in the town forward.
Mr. Maroney.
So as I mentioned in my opening statement, I am a creative perfumer, and I think that brings me the ability to be creative thinking and be a creative problem solver. The ability to think differently from many of the attorneys and bankers on the board and in the town provides me, again, with a unique skill set. Where I think I'm best served is where I am currently, as on the Facilities Committee. I think the goals of, as I mentioned, I think my wife went to the portables in the school. That's one of our goals, is to eliminate the portables in the schools. So I think, we have a vision there. We have a vision of reimagining the libraries and expanding the classrooms, as well as working to optimize our class sizes, which was something we discussed over the past few weeks, and we will be taking up at the subcommittee meeting as well this week. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comment? Go on to the second question. We'll begin with Ms. Parent. Are there any lessons learned from the district's coronavirus response that you think should be carried into our standard operations? Anything we've learned from our difficult period?
Well, I think we've learned a lot, and I think we are currently still learning, and we will continue to learn in the months and years going forward. I think we've learned that dialogue and communication is incredibly important. I think that there's just been a lot of information that it has been sent out, and I think we've tried to figure out, or the board has tried to figure out a way to maybe streamline that and work with the administration to make sure that parents have all the information they need. I do think we need to continue dialogue, and we need to make sure that all the voices are heard. And I think what we've also learned is that the loudest voice in the room is not always the correct voice or the majority voice, and I think that our community has learned that every voice is important and should continue to be heard. So going forward, I hope that the Board of Education continues to make communication and dialogue a priority.
Mr. Deneen.
I think we've learned a lot. I think the approach that we took in terms of opening up in the hybrid model gave us the opportunity to learn a lot. It is a fluid situation, and there's no playbook out there. I think one of the outcomes that I've seen or that I've felt in listening to parents and even students is the technology side of it. I think we've been fortunate to invest in and have the right technology in our schools. But I think it was a quick ramp up, and I think it was a quick learning. And I think if we go back, there's a lot to take away from that as we go forward. I think the one thing that we should think about is technology should be a support for our students. It shouldn't be the focus of our students. And I think we have to talk about that shift and having the right technology, but having it work in line with the curriculum and the education that we have to deliver for our students.
Mr. Maroney.
Yeah, so what I think we've learned is something we've known all along is how important it is to have teachers teach students in person. So I think that was super important, and I think we're seeing that. I think the children need to be around other children. I think it's mandatory for their mental health and their mental well-being is to see other kids and to have them understand that they're not the only ones going through this. And when you're isolated alone, learning in front of a computer, it's very difficult. I think Duke brought up a great point, is I think we're very lucky that we have invested in our technology, but the technology can't be the focus. The technology just needs to be the support of the system. But having said that, I think there are a few advantages that we can possibly take advantage of. Is something that I brought up at a meeting is, can we do work with other schools in other areas to bring in diversity into the schools? So can we have a discussion about Huckleberry Finn with a classroom of 8th graders in Darien as well as 8th graders in Birmingham, Alabama, and we would have hopefully a unique discussion and a unique perspective that we wouldn't be able to get from just Connecticut.
Any further comments? Mr. Burke.
I think one of the great lessons we learned during COVID is how important board communication and administration communication is to the community. This was an unprecedented situation. The demand for information, the need for information was great. I think we handled it fairly well, but I think we can do better in terms of getting the word out there exactly in terms of what is happening and why. And as a board, I think we need to help educate the public on what is our role. What can we actively do as opposed to what is an administrative function? I think there was some frustration, properly so, with the parent community because they weren't sure what the board's role was versus the administration's role. I think those are all great lessons that we've learned going forward. I think Duke makes an excellent point about our technology. It was wonderful that we amped up our technology over the last few years, but it was designed to be a support to classroom education, not to replace it. But obviously, during the hybrid environment, it did replace it for a bit. So we have to make sure that we're ready for that if it happens again, and we're ready to improve technology.
Yes.
I think all great points by my friends on the panel here, and I think to everyone's point, we need to think outside of the box. We need to look at how does technology and these learnings play into summer school, how does it come into play into early learning, how does it come into working with other districts and helping other districts and looking for efficiencies in delivering services. I was at a meeting recently and we were talking about screen time, and the comment came up, instead of Google, let's go outside. So I think if anything we've learned from doing remote learning and putting all our students and young people on screen time, I think it's important that we think what is outside of and what we need to do away from screen time, and I think that's an important conversation.
Mr. Maroney.
One thing I forgot to say that I think is very important that we learned and we need to do a better job of is privacy and security. So I think there have been some incidents with students and their computers, and we need to do a much better job of tightening up the security and the privacy of those students' computers.
Yes, Ms. Parent.
I just want to build on the communication, and Mr. Deneen was talking about the screen time, and I think it's important that going forward, that if we do need to go back to a hybrid or remote environment, which I hope we do not have to, but if we do have to, I think we really need to make sure that the parents understand what is expected of children, and that the parents understand what is developmentally appropriate for young children. I think that, to Mr. Deneen's point, learning on the screen is not appropriate for our youngest learners. And parents need to understand that and not expect that their child is going to be sitting in front of a screen for 6 hours, because that's just not developmentally appropriate. So I hope that the administration and the teachers are working to create a better scenario if we do need to go back to that environment. But I think having parents know what's expected is incredibly important going forward.
Mr. Berg.
And another point is we need to be looking directly at our children. We need to understand that they've never had an experience like this before, from K through 12. And as parents at home, as teachers in the classroom, we need to keep an eye on them and see who might be lagging a little bit. Not lagging in terms of a few points on a grade, but who seems out of place, who seems to be having trouble. We need to make sure that we keep a good eye on all of our learners and make sure that all of them get the resources they need as we build ourselves back from this horrific environment.
Thank you. Crucial issue. Next question. What are your priorities for the maintenance and improvement of the district's facilities? And we'll begin with Mr. Deneen.
That is a great question, and the one word I would probably throw out there is portables, and I think we'd get a round of applause behind the scenes. We developed a master plan several years ago. We've been working through that master plan. One of the outcomes of that master plan was a focus on Oxridge, and the dollars in investment that needed to go into Oxridge proved that it was time to rebuild that school. So I've been on the Oxridge Building Committee, and as I said earlier, we're about ready to put shovel in the ground come November, and we'll be building a new elementary school for the district, state-of-the-art school that will really serve the district and also the ELP program. I think the other points are we've got to continually look at, there are classrooms that need to be sized differently. There are overall renovations that have to be done to a lot of the buildings. Our facilities team does a great job with maintenance, but we have to continuously look at what the investments are. And once we get Oxridge done, we have a parallel project that we're working on in terms of library redesign and portables. And then from that, we'll have to look at each school individually as to what the needs are to remove the portables, get kids into the right size classrooms, and continue to maintain and invest in our facilities.
Mr. Maroney.
So I think Duke has stolen all of our thunder, I believe. But not obviously, but to me, obviously, portables are the main focus, and we need to eliminate those. Having said that, the portables were very advantageous for us during this period of COVID to have the flexible space to use. So luckily for us, we haven't been able to get rid of them. But I think Duke brings up a great point is the classroom sizes. So we have a lot of disparity within the district of classroom size, not just the number of students in the class, but the physical size of the classrooms, and we need to look at that. But I think the big thing that we really have to look at is that what's happened typically in Darien is we build every 20 years. So Hindley and Holmes were built in the 30s and 40s, and Oxridge and Tokenique and Royal were built in the 60s, and then there were additions done in the 90s, and we're looking to do additions now. And so I think what we have to be careful is to space out this time frame so we don't put an onus on the next generation, so that we have a systematic plan to renovate and repair schools at one at a time, so it's not done in a lump sum at one time.
Mr. Burke.
I agree with portables. They've been here too long. They're the bane of our existence, and they need to go. I think another facility-related issue that we started to look at before COVID was busing. It's not physical structure, but it's important because it's how we get our children to school. I understand that there are some students who perhaps have to cover greater distances than that is really practicable. It might be inside our technical requirements for busing, but I think we have to look closely at how we get our students to school, and I hope we get a chance to go back to that. As we've gone through our construction projects in the recent past, I know that our guidepost has been no more value engineering. I think one of the problems with these older schools is that when they were designed and when they were repaired, it was at a cheap cost. And I know as we've created our new construction projects, it's no longer our guidepost. So we need to follow our plan, and we need to create our buildings in a way that makes sense and a way that creates value.
Ms. Parent.
Thank you. So anybody who has heard me for the past 5 years stand at that podium, whether it was chair of the Holmes PTO or as co-chair of the Council of Darien School Parents, I have been screaming, not literally screaming, but screaming for the removal of those portables. They are over 3 decades old, some of them. That's not portable. That's permanent. They have to go. I was really pleased in 2016 with the rollout of the master plan, and I think there was some great work done from that plan. Mr. Deneen has done an excellent job leading the Oxbridge Building Committee, and that school is going to be spectacular. However, that master plan seems to have just been sitting right now. There has not been a lot of work done on that. In fact, there was not a meeting of the Facilities Subcommittee from December 18th, 2017 to March 7th, 2019. That's 15 months without a Facilities Committee meeting. That's unacceptable. Just unacceptable. I worked on the Libraries Reimagine project at Holmes 3 years ago, 4 years ago even. Nothing has been done. We have to focus on our facilities. We have 3 elementary schools that are calling out desperately for some renovations and for some more space. It has to be a priority. So I agree with the other comments that have been made that we have to make a plan, we have to spread it out. I think that we have to make sure that the expenses remain rather consistent over the years. Last year's capital expense line was approximately $1 million. This year's capital expense line is projected to be almost $6 million. It's very hard to have an appropriate budget when you have such varied line items.
Any further comments? Yes.
All great points, and I think we shouldn't forget that there was a lot of hard work done by the board also on redesigning and expanding the high school cafeteria, and I think that plays into a history of sometimes looking at how do we do things in the least expensive way, and I think that proved out with what we needed to do for the high school, but it's a project that came together and has really added a lot of value up at the high school. The other thing that I've learned in working with Hartford on the building committee, and to everyone's point about the costs associated with facilities, you know, our reimbursement on these facilities projects is nominal. It's about less than 10%, right around 10% that we'll get back on the Oxbridge Elementary School versus a $189 million grant from the state to Norwalk to build a new school. So unfortunately, the dime is on us. So we have to be prudent as we look at the facilities and look what we need to do with the remainder of the schools.
We'll go to the next question. We'll begin with Mr. Maroney. On a scale of 1 to 10, and 10 being superior, how would you rate the Board of Education on transparency and accountability? And also, what recommendations would you make to improve both? So again, how would you rate the Board of Education on transparency and accountability, and what recommendations to improve?
I think maybe I'll answer the number at the end. So I think what we do well is we have meetings in public, and we discuss our business in public, and we debate, we try to make decisions from there. I think what we have not done very well is, so I think there's different levels of analytics with this. So I think there's a transactional element, which I think we do well. So like our budget is very open, it's in a book, everyone can do it. We spend a month going through our budget. But where I think we lack is in the analytical part and the empirical part, where it's why we're doing the decisions we're making. And I don't think we communicate that well enough, and we need to do a much better job. It's why I proposed that we have a communications committee last meeting to discuss this, because I don't think we're doing a good enough job to communicate to our constituents and our citizens. I don't think we're doing a good enough job of listening to our constituents, and I don't think our administration is doing a good enough job of conversing with us and keeping us in the loop and allowing us to empower ourselves to be better board members. So I would give us a 7. I think we do a good job, but we have definitely room to improve.
Mr. Burke.
I wholly disagree. We earn a 10. Every single thing we do is in public. Every vote is public. Every document that we look at is available to the public practically as we see it. Our decisions, I think there's a difference between feeling that there isn't enough communication and a feeling that there's unhappiness with a particular decision or an outcome. I can't imagine any other town body being more transparent. The reality of the Board of Education is there is nothing that we are able to do in private. When I'm standing by myself at a soccer or a football game, I'm just a citizen. You have to be in the room where it happens to vote. That's how we communicate. And I was at that meeting where Mr. Maroney proposed a communication subcommittee. I think it's worthy of discussion. I think we're going to have a working group to discuss that and to create the parameters of what the need is. But in this recent COVID crisis, for instance, we had hundreds of emails from parents, hybrid or full-time, and all of those were terribly informative and helpful. And we had them because they were informed as to what was going on, and they cared and they communicated. And I know I, as a board member, was happy to read every single one of them. So again, I would give us a 10. I'm always listening or happy to hear a good idea for something in addition that we can do, but I think we do a pretty good job of it now.
Ms. Parent.
Thank you. I think I would rate the issue of transparency of solid 8. I think that, to Mr. Burke's point, the budget is completely transparent. Every line item is public. Every meeting minutes are public. You can watch on 79 or on Vimeo. Everything is public. The discussions are done in public, with the exception of one. Last year, there was a budget discussion by 5 members of the Board of Education that was not public. There are no minutes of that meeting. There is no published report of that meeting. That discussing the budget, not in public, is not transparent. And again, I'm going to use the word unacceptable. That was unacceptable. May have been legal, but it was unacceptable. Not okay to report that to the Darien community. Where are the notes? What did you discuss? In terms of accountability, I think I will give a solid 8. I think the board has done a good job of listening to constituents, but I think there's always more. There's always more time to listen and more ways to listen. I think that the administration could be better at relaying their information to the board as well. So I think a solid 8 would be my answer.
Mr. Dineen.
Thank you. I would go out there with a solid 9. I think there's always room for improvement. There's always room to listen and to learn. I think the role of the board is to help create the right dialogue, and I think we're doing that this past year by also kicking off and working through building the strategic plan, which I think will help guide us and move the district forward. When it comes to transparency and accountability, I'm challenged sometimes by the word transparency, and it comes up a lot around the budget, and I agree with all my colleagues here. I don't think the budget could be any more transparent. It is out there line by line. We go through it line by line. I often wonder if the word transparency needs to be switched with education and people understanding how our budget works. Accountability, I think our meetings are done in public. I think over the 6 years that I've been on the board, the presentations around curriculum, around special ed, around other projects that are going on have become clearer and more in depth. I think some of that comes from the board continuing to ask the right questions and look for the right metrics. And I think that's what we have to continue to do.
Mr. Maroney? Oh, I'm sorry, you've responded. Thank you, excuse me. Any other comments on improvement? Mr. Burke.
Well, just in terms of accountability, because I didn't address that, obviously, we're all here, we're in a contested race. There are 3 seats up for the Board of Education every year, so a third of us are held accountable every single year. With regard to the administration, the superintendent serves at our pleasure. We interviewed him, we hired him, and we renew or choose not to renew his contract every single year. So there is a great deal of accountability that goes into our district work.
Mr. Deneen.
Just a quick follow-up to that, because I think Mr. Burke brings up some good points. I think the other thing that we need to think about as we go forward, too, is understanding the roles and responsibilities of the board and the roles and the responsibilities of the superintendent and the administration. There's a lot of things that come up that are real operational. But with that, we have to listen to the community. But I think as we go forward, it's something to really think about, is making sure people understand roles and responsibilities in the chain of command, because I think that would help, and that's something that will probably come out of the work that needs to be done on a communication plan.
Yes, Mr. Maroney.
I think giving ourselves a 10 for our working is disingenuous. I find that, our last meeting, we had over 90 minutes of parents and teachers calling in and voicing their frustration and uncertainty about where we're going and what we're doing and how it's being communicated. And so I think that alone tells us that we have a lot of room to improve.
Mr. Burke.
Well, having been referred to as disingenuous, I'll just reassert the point. That conversation occurred because we had published what was going on in the meeting. There was a great decision to make. There were a lot of people who did not want to go to a full-time open. There were a lot of people who wanted to stay in hybrid. There were a lot of people who were upset that we had not opened sooner. So I don't think it was a communication or a transparency problem. I think that there was just great discord in terms of the choices that we made. And I understand that. And you know what? We do the best we can. We make the most informed decisions we can. And I think the hybrid to full-time opening was the right one. I was fully supportive of it. And I was happy to hear the comments and the petitions on both sides of those issues. But that's not a sign of lack of transparency. That's a sign of community engagement, and I welcome it.
Yes? The next question, and we'll begin again with Mr. Burke. If teachers are not allowed to tutor a student assigned to them, should a coach be able to run a paid camp for players who will be trying out for places on their team? Why or why not? Teachers are not allowed to tutor a student assigned to them. Should a coach be able to run a paid camp for players who will be trying out for a place on their team? Mr. Burke.
The fact of the matter is that there are 2 different governing bodies related to those 2 professions, coaching on the one hand, teachers on the other. I was proud to be on the negotiation committee that negotiated with the teachers union over the last 2 contracts. And I think we produced contracts that were fair and reasonable, mindful that we were spending taxpayer dollars, but also honoring their incredibly important work. Pursuant to those contracts, we have made the decision that teachers should not be tutoring students while they are in the same classroom. And I think the benefits of that are self-evident. The FCAC controls what the coaches can do, what camps they can do, what their level of compensation is. We also have Fair Labor Standards Acts. There's a limited ability that we have to control what other people do or what coaches do to earn an income, and that's properly so. It's a great question. It makes sense why one and not the other, but the reality is it's 2 different governing bodies and it's 2 different issues.
Ms. Parent.
I would agree with what Mr. Burke said. I think that it definitely seems at the surface that there's certainly a conflict of interest if a coach is coaching in a pay-to-play situation. As an educator, I know that I was not allowed to tutor the students in my class, and that for good reason. And I do think that there could be a conflict of interest, and I think a broader discussion about this might be necessary. But again, there's 2 separate but governing bodies.
Mr. Deneen.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I compliment Mr. Burke on his response as I sat on the negotiating committee with him, and we spent a lot of time on this issue. I don't think it's, you can really put the two together from a comparison standpoint in terms of how they're governed. I do agree that teachers should not be tutoring their students. And I think the coaching and the summer programs and the private coaching fall in line under FCAC guidelines. But I do think it's something that's worth an ongoing dialogue, especially with the great focus we have on sports in this town. And there is an incredible focus on tutoring and making sure our students have the extra resources that we need.
Mr. Maroney.
I think Mr. Burke raises a great point that it's two separate entities. You know, I think we can all easily understand the difficulty of a teacher tutoring their one student and the difficulty in grading fairly and equitably on that. And I think the question is, doesn't that apply to the sports? I think we've tried to discuss this in our summer retreats a couple of times, athletics. It's a very difficult dilemma, and there are many people who feel it's a pay-to-play, where you have to join a summer camp in order to be able to make the varsity team. But what ends up happening with us anyway is that sometimes the coaches don't run the practice, and they have someone else run the practice, but it's still oversought by the coach. So it's really difficult for us as a Board of Education to control that, and it's really kind of out of our lane to do that as well. So it's difficult.
Thank you. Further comments, further discussion? Next question, and we'll begin with Ms. Parent. In the event it's needed to reduce the Board of Education budget, where would you look first to find reductions?
So budgeting is really, really complex. I will always be an advocate for all of Darien's children, and I will fight for programming, I will fight for staff. Anything that directly touches a student should be the last to be cut. I feel very strongly that Darien is in a great position to be able to support every student as best as possible. We are very lucky to live in this town. Darien is in excellent financial health. We have a very, very overfunded general fund. Currently, it's $8 million over the Board of Finance's minimum guidelines. We are very fortunate to be able to live in a town that is well-funded. And if this is not the time to use that $8 million extra dollars in this coronavirus environment, I don't know what is. So I will always be an advocate for children, and I think, always looking for efficiencies, of course, is the way to go. If we could share services with in other ways, of course we should be looking at that. But I am an advocate for the best resources for all children and all staff.
Mr. Dineen.
Thank you. Darien has a long history of investing in education, and having sat through the budget cycle for 6 years and worked with the Board of Finance and listened to dozens and dozens and dozens of parents come up through this walkway here and give their feelings on and supporting the board budget each year. I think we have the support because I think the superintendent and the administration has delivered good budgets over the last couple of years. The last budget cycle was challenging. The next one will be challenging. But I think our new superintendent, our new finance chief, has done what needs to be done in terms of looking at the budget and looking for efficiencies. The last place I want to go is touching anything to do with education. So I think it's continuously looking at the efficiencies within the budget.
Mr. Maroney.
Could I ask you to repeat the question, please, again? Sorry. Could I ask you to repeat the question, please?
Repeat the question,
Yes.
yes. In the event it was needed to reduce the Board of Education budget, where would you look first to find reductions?
So I think the guiding principle is to protect student learning, and schools exist for children. We need to, as we did in this spring's budget, which we didn't have to cut from the budget, it was a lesser increase than we had proposed. What we did was, as we've mentioned, as others have mentioned, we first looked at efficiencies and had our administration find over $700,000 of efficiencies and renegotiated contracts. And then The other part that we really should look at is, and where we can do better communication and collaboration is, I think we can work productively with our community endeavors and work with the Darien Technology Foundation and the Darien Community Fund and look to see if they can help with some expenses. But the biggest part I think that we have to really look at is our strategic plan should feed our initiatives, and that should be the blueprint that we work from, and that is how we should work. But I think the other part as well is, as Duke has said, we have done a great job of capitalizing. We've had our financial hardships in this town at this time. I think there's a lot of people that are going to be affected if they're not already. The beauty of this and campaigning is, I've gotten the ability to walk around and meet people, and I've seen and spoken to some parents who haven't been able to get promoted because they've had to spend time teaching their children, and that's difficult. And I feel really, awful for that situation to have occurred. But again, I think we have a very great Board of Finance that has done a great job of being fiscally responsible and have a quote-unquote rainy day fund, and I think we're at the rainy day time.
Thank you. Any additional comments on reductions?
I haven't gone yet.
Mr.
Okay.
Burke.
Well, someone once said, if you think education is expensive, try ignorance. So education is an expensive endeavor, no matter how you look at it. We realize budget efficiencies as we go through our regular order. On the time that I've been on the board, we created Fitch Academy, which actually saved us money. We created a copy center where the teachers were no longer copying in the classroom, and it was done in central office. And that actually, I think that cost saving helped pay for the initial expense of Fitch. We purchased some vehicles so we could transport our children who had to go to other schools instead of paying privately. So we look for those efficiencies, and we gain them all the time. A word, though, about this budget. The Board of Finance wanted our budget cut, mandated our budget be cut by over $1 million. And yes, we received some relief by renegotiating some contracts. I think we had some efficiencies there, but then we had a decision to make. We had to decide whether or not we wanted to use some of our budget surplus that came from the COVID closings and apply them to pre-buy things into this year and reduce our budget for this fiscal year. And I will tell you, there were people on our board who weren't in favor of that. There were people who were afraid that we weren't acting within the spirit of the mandate of the Board of Finance. But as I pointed out at the time, I work for the Board of Education, not the Board of Finance. And I'm here for children, not for random budget cuts. And we were able to create our budget this year by doing this pre-buying. And there are always opportunities to save on budgets, but to say that we would cut or have an idea of a particular thing to cut, I think is irresponsible, because it doesn't take into account the situation in the classroom with the particular teachers or their particular students in a particular year. So we do the best we can every year. We scrutinize that budget. I've been part of that budget process for 6 years, and there are no nice-to-haves in it. There are things that are absolutely needed for our children.
Mr. Denny.
The only thing I'd like to add to that in terms of talking about budgets and dollars, I don't think we can say it enough, but a thank you to the organizations that are out there that support the district, the Darien Athletic Foundation, the Community Fund, the parents, and the folks that are associated with the PTOs. The funds that they raised, the funds that have been donated for some infrastructure projects around our fields are tremendous. And it just adds incredible value to the overall district and the education of our kids.
Ms. Parent.
Mr. Burke brought up the pre-buying that happened during last budget season, and I think that was incredibly important. And I just wanted to publicly thank Mr. Deneen and Mr. Burke for supporting that pre-buy, because it meant that there was no cuts to our programming and to our staff. So that just wanted to say publicly thank you for that.
Thank you. The next question will begin with Mr. Deneen. What do you think has been the root cause for the turnover in top administrators, specifically the role of the superintendent? And how can we, as a community, address the issue?
Thank you. In the 6 years that I've been on the board, I came on as a superintendent was leaving because of the special ed situation. I've worked with 2 interim superintendents who we were fortunate to get and did a great job while they were here. I think at the time I was part of the superintendent search, and we hired the right superintendent with Dr. Brenner. And Dr. Brenner had an incredible opportunity presented to him to go into the city and work for the UN school. Sitting on the second superintendent search committee and seeing many qualified candidates, I think we landed on the right candidate with Dr. Adley. So while it seems like there's been a lot of superintendents over the last couple of years, there's been very specific reasons why that's happened. One of the things that we spent a lot of time on during the search is speaking to people about a long-term commitment to the district. I think Dr. Brenner was looking for that, wanted to make that commitment, but had this incredible opportunity, and I know Alan has made that commitment, and I think he was the right hire for the district.
Mr. Maroney?
So I think we've had a lot of difficulty starting from the special education dilemma that we ran through. But I think it's difficult because we've had a lot of superintendents, but they've been interim superintendents. I think Dr. Brenner would have been here for a long time, but he ended up with a dream job to teach at the international school in New York. I mean, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that came forward to him, so he had to leave. So and then we had to have an interim superintendent and now a full-time superintendent is. And I think the beauty of serving on the superintendent search committee is as Duke said, we had a lot of great candidates, but we had an outstanding candidate which rose to the top clearly in Dr. Adley. And I think Darien is very lucky, and I think we're all proud members of the board and the community to have him as our superintendent, and I look forward to many, many years of him serving as our superintendent.
Mr. Burke?
We had one superintendent leave because we wanted that superintendent to leave. We've had another one who came, who left for a great opportunity, and we can't control that. I make it a policy not to disagree with Duke when he's absolutely right, and he's absolutely right in this case. We picked the right man with Dr. Adley. I am convinced that he will be here for the long term. I think as a community and as a board, we can remember to always treat him with civility and respect, but I have great faith in his abilities and his longevity.
Ms. Parent?
Thank you. So I think that these 3 gentlemen have explained why we have, the turnover has been what it is. I will echo Mr. Burke and Mr. Deneen in that Dr. Adley is the right person for this job and for this town. I came to know him well last year in my role as co-chair of Council of Darien School Parents. We met weekly throughout the spring, and I've come to know him well as I serve on the Strategic Planning Committee, which is made up of a wide variety of 27 great people all working together with the best interests of Darien schools. And his vision for these schools and our collective vision, it's exciting. It's really exciting. And to Mr. Burke's point of treating our administrators with respect and civility, absolutely. Tensions are high right now. There are parents that are really unhappy with the way things started off and the way things happened in the spring, but we're a small community. We have to work together, and we have to be kind to each other. What are we teaching our children when we get up at public comment and berate teachers and administrators? It's just not okay. We are a small community. We need to treat each other well, and I think if we do that, Dr. Adley is here for the long term.
Additional comments? Before we go, yes, Mr. Maroney.
Yeah, I would like to comment on the treating people well. So I think what was very interesting is that 2 of the people sitting on this panel have made an attack to a citizen. The citizen, quote, put a Facebook post out and saying that they were concerned about their children not going back to school. And 2 members here came back and wrote a diatribe against that person. And I just want to say, I think it's firmly unethical and unacceptable to attack a parent because of their voter registration. And to call someone out to be political when they're just advocating for their child to go back to school is unacceptable. And I think the rhetoric doesn't match their record, and I really struggle with how they can serve on a board without bias when they attack someone because they happen to have an R next to their name at one point because they're advocating for their child.
Mr. Burke.
Well, I need to address that. Mr. Maroney's talking about a letter that we wrote in response to a well-publicized comment from an individual who called our campaign a farce and misrepresented a Board of Education vote. And when you're a Board of Education, I think it's important to be truthful, and that's what we were being. If you're going to call, I don't care if you call me a farce, but to call my campaign and the people who are working so hard to get our message out is just intolerable. And for the record, the person who made that comment, it's interesting that Denny is carrying that guy's water. I called him after those comments. I spoke to him. We resolved it. There was no problem. There was no sense I had from him that there was any part of my comments that were inappropriate. And I've been in this community for a long time. I've had a long record of service, and I find those comments from Mr. Maroney offensive. I know he called me a bully at a Republican event, and I think he owes me an apology.
Any additional comments?
I will just say in response to that, I will always defend proper information and facts getting out. And when somebody spreads misinformation to hundreds of people, that information needs to be correct.
Go to the next question. We'll begin with Mr. Maroney. What is your position on private caucuses of political parties to discuss Board of Education business?
I'm sorry, I can't hear the question.
Could not hear you.
I'm sorry. Is this better?
Yes.
All right, try once again. How does this sound?
Okay.
Yes?
Yeah, please.
Sorry. What is your position on private caucuses of political parties to discuss Board of Education business?
So I think this was brought up before by Mrs. Parent. So the goal is to have everything be transparent as much as possible. So the goal would be to not have to have a caucus if necessary. Our problem is that the board tried to do this work in public, and there was many requests to have discussions with the board and have the Finance Committee meet to discuss the proposed budget reduction. And we were denied. So what I think is we wanted to have our kids, we want to put the kids first, and organizing your thoughts, not your votes, and allowing board members to do that. If you go back and look at the votes, there was not one time that the Republican Party voted all in one way, other than when things were unanimous. So there was no collusion, there was nothing done to do that. And I think what has happened is we're having a lot of difficulty with this board of being inclusive. And I think if we had a better inclusive board, we would have had better discussions and better outcomes, saving board members, parents, and students from stress and strife during this time.
Mr. Burke.
The caucus may have been legal, but I believe we ought to have a higher standard in this town than whether something is legal or not. I would not participate in something like that, and I will leave my comments at that because I see that I'm about reaching my maximum time. But I would say a lot more if I could.
Thank you. I strongly believe that politics has no place in education. In fact, Mr. Maroney asked to this point to be clarified at their retreat this summer from Patrice McCarthy, who's the general counsel for the the Connecticut Association of Board of Education, and her response was, political parties should be shed at the door as soon as the board chair is elected. That has not happened. 5 years ago, when I started sitting in the Board of Education room, you couldn't tell who was a Republican or a Democrat. It is crystal clear now, and it should not be that way. And if I am elected to the board, I am going to be an independent thinker and a critical thinker, and I will do what is right for children, regardless of whether it's a Republican that brought up the idea or a Democrat that brought up the idea. Politics has no place on the Board of Education.
Mr. Denny.
It was a legal meeting, And at that point in time, that group of people felt they needed to get together to look at and discuss budget items as we were going through a very difficult budget process. To Mike Burke's point, everyone keeps wanting to give it fuel, and I think we've been there and we've done that, and the question's been answered. And we have so many other things going on. We accomplished what we needed to do at the budget meeting. Not all the votes aligned by either party. And personally, I think it's the conversation around it we've had enough of it.
Yes, Mr.
Yeah, I think when someone calls out a private member of the public for their voter registration affiliation, that is partisan. That is being political. And it's difficult to not have to be able to say that you can go and do that, and once you sit at the board table, you're going to just take your cloak off and take it away. It's not going to happen. Your behavior is your behavior. And so we should call that out and deem it inappropriate in every instance. What I think we struggle with on the board is I think there's two different mindsets. It's not about being a political party. It's about whether you want to move the board forward or you're happy with the way it is. And I think Mr. Burke's comments of grading the board a 10 shows that he's happy the way it is. I think there are many on the board who are trying to improve the board, and to give it a 10 means there's no more to go, right? That's the highest number. So I think our goal is to improve the board. So you can't give it a 10 to do that. And I think that's where there's differences. Some people are happy with where we are and don't want to improve, and there are others who are trying to improve, and we're having conflict because of that, not because of political party.
Ms. Parent.
I'm just going to say that if you were running for the Board of Education or sitting on the Board of Education, your goal should always be to improve, regardless if you're a Democrat or a Republican. That comment makes no sense.
Mr. Burke.
Mrs. Darien, if we're at a 10, the next thing is 12. I mean, that's the reality of where we live, and I think we all understood that. And, I'm proud to be on the board. I'm proud of all of our work. And yes, I want to advocate for us as a group of 9 when we do something well. And when we make mistakes, call them out. But this isn't one of them, and that's why I said 10. We can always improve, all of us, in everything that we do.
I believe this will be probably our last question, and then we'll go to closing comments. The timing, you're quite close to being quite equal on your timing. Well done. Last question then, regionalization. What is your definition of regionalization as it applies to the school system? Is there any aspect of regionalization you would support? So how would you define it, and what would you support? What part of it? We'll begin with Mr. Burke.
The way I understand regionalization is shared educational services within the classrooms and within school buildings, and I am not for that. I think that the best people to decide what goes on in the classroom in Darien are Darien parents and teachers and board members. I have yet to see a regionalization plan that makes any sense. To be sure, if there is a way to achieve some economic efficiencies through purchasing, that's one thing, but regionalization, as I understand it, no.
Ms. Parent.
Thank you. I think regionalization in terms of the education setting is what Mr. Burke said, is sharing educational services and classroom services across town lines. And I am firmly opposed to that idea. In fact, I went 2 years ago when the bills were presented to the General Assembly. I went and I testified against those bills in front of the Education Committee at the Connecticut General Assembly. It doesn't make sense. Those bills did not make sense. I do not see that there are any strong bills in the pipeline about this regionalization. I think that, again, if we can share services across the board, that would be great. But in terms of sharing educational services, absolutely not.
Mr. Deneen.
Yeah, I've not seen any plan or heard anything that makes sense coming out of Hartford around regionalization. I think, again, we look for efficiencies continuously. And I think we should, and we always do, look for opportunities in shared services. And we should look across districts to see if there are opportunities for delivery of services across the districts that we work with, something like the Fitch Academy, but regionalization, no.
Mr. Maroney.
I think along with my colleagues here, I believe that regionalization is a giant mistake. The shared services between other towns, data has shown that it doesn't work. If that did happen, it would result in diminished outcomes for students, both in terms of resources and learnings. I am fully supportive of keeping local control to drive accountability exclusively to Darien residents and taxpayers. As well, and the thing I think with Duke as well is I think what could be interesting is can we work with the town to share services? Can we work with our facilities and the town parks and rec department? Can we find ways to share those services? And we've tried. We've had difficulties there, but now, we share services at the town garage. So I think that's one way, and I think we try to do the best job we can there.
Additional comments? Thank you. Well, the time has come for closing statements. Each candidate has 1 minute, and we'll begin with Mr. Michael Burke.
Thank you to my colleagues. Thank you to the league. Thank you for everybody for taking the time to watch this tonight. I'm proud of our achievements during my tenure on the board. Fitch Academy, technology advancement, negotiating responsible teacher agreements that honor their incredible work, creation of new and dynamic curriculums, constructions of lunchrooms and lights, creating and advocating for budgets that put our children first and have made our district the best in the state and among the finest in the nation. And of course, being part of a team that protected our children by closing and now reopening our schools safely. No other district had done that before, and I truly believe, for all of the hiccups and shortfalls, none has done it better. But I run not because of the achievements of the past, but rather the challenges ahead. We must continue to operate our schools safely and reimagine our schools so that while we hopefully return to normalcy, we're prepared for every eventuality. I've done this work. I know what is required. I have put our children first. Vote for me on November 3rd, and I'll continue to do so.
Ms. Sarah Parent.
Thank you. We should be proud of Darien schools and the work of the Board of Education, but there is still much work to do. I hope that through our conversation tonight, you have seen that I am a passionate advocate for all of Darien's children, and I have the skills to guide our district forward through these tumultuous times and beyond. It's never been more clear that the voice of an educator is needed on the voice of the Board of Education. So much has changed in our schools and in our lives over these past 7 months. The future of education is unknown. We will likely see changes coming out of our experience this year. Darien's Board of Education needs someone with education experience, expertise, a deep knowledge of curriculum development, and the heart and the mind of a teacher. I am that person. I am ready, willing, and able to do the best that I can for all of Darien's children and families. Kids come first, always. I ask you for your vote and your support. Thank you.
Mr. David Deneen.
Thank you again to the Women's League of Voters for hosting the event, and thank you for all those that participated and sent in questions. I've lived in Darien close to 25 years, my wife 50 years. She is a graduate. I have a daughter that's graduated and 2 daughters in the high school. I know the passion in this community around education, extracurriculars, volunteerism, philanthropy, and yes, sports. I bring a combination of volunteer service, board experience, and over 30 years of business experience and leadership roles to the board. As I said in my opening remarks, I want a board that delivers the best each day for our students while building for the future. Some points I'm committed to focusing on: an effective communication strategy that's based on keeping the community connected, being nimble, developing the right policies that align with goals and objectives to get things done, be advocates and leaders for the right change and develop the right change management process, deliver fiscally responsible budgets in good times and bad that invest in education, finish our facilities master plan, and yes, remove portables. Understand what our students need and what they have lost in this pandemic, and support the administration with the resources requested. We need to pause and reflect. Our schools are opened. We've learned a lot in the hybrid model. We're a very fortunate town. We need to keep the perspective. There are many schools that are not opened. They've remained closed. They have little or no technology, and some have not been able to find teachers to fill the classroom. We know there's more to be done, and I'm committed to that work. I appreciate your vote and support. Have a great evening.
Mr. Dennis Maroney.
I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters again and my fellow colleagues up here tonight. I think what's important is the work the board has done over the past number of years to strengthen curricular supports, academic assessments, intervention programs, social and emotional learning, and technological capabilities has positioned us well. We can improve to continue to do that better. The board needs to have better oversight, continued collaboration, and improved communication. But for me, I think one of the things we're most proud of and where we really needed to have this was this social and emotional learning. And I think I'm a champion for that and have been for the 3 years I've been on the board. And I think what really has come through is we were able to manage this COVID with the ability to have the extra psychologists at the elementary school, which will reap benefits in years to come. The ability to have them have early intervention will allow us to have better time and better work at the middle school and high school going forward. So I'm really proud of that aspect, and I would really appreciate your vote in November and look forward to serving another 3 years. Thank you.
Thank you.
On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Darien, thank you to the candidates. Good luck and good health to all of you, and thank you for making this debate possible. And thanks to the timers and all of you volunteers who've worked hard, I know. And one final word to all of the voters, please vote. Remember, in the League, we say democracy is not a spectator sport. Thank you.